So, David, thank you for joining us. There have been a series of quite extraordinary developments in politics this week. We'll start with Suella Braverman. Before she was moved on as the Home Secretary, she, some would say, incited violence in London. She also seemed to have a bit of a pop at the police. Her job was supposed to be about making Britain safer. She did precisely the opposite of that, didn't she?
Yeah, frankly, I always felt that Suella Braverman wasn't fit to hold the office of Home Secretary. I think it was a huge mistake by Rishi Sunak to appoint her in the first place. Let's remember that she'd had to resign because of breaching the ministerial code just days before he reappointed her. So it was a staggering decision. It looks like they'd done some sort of deal, we now hear. But nevertheless, he should never have appointed her because her track record as Home Secretary has been shocking. The way she tried to interfere with the independence of the police, I think really crossed a line for many people, including some Conservatives. I think that was against all our constitutional principles. But then the remarks she made about people who were protesting were quite outrageous, and many people think, obviously difficult to prove, but it's not surprising, you saw that horrendous violence from far-right thugs. So I think it was right that she went, but she should never have been appointed, and frankly, she'd have been sacked a lot earlier.
Well, of course, the comments about the protests came in the wake of comments about homelessness, and those were just quite atrocious in the view of many people. Would you agree with that?
Oh, totally. I'm really proud of my wife, who's a counsellor in Kingston, in my area, and she works very hard on housing. In fact, we met over discussing housing policy, including how you help homeless people. And I think it ought to be sort of cross-party that you help people who have fallen on bad times. Some of these are ex-veterans where they've served our country and they have had mental health problems as a result of that, post-PSTD and a whole range of different conditions. Some have had health problems, mental health problems, some have had alcohol problems and so on. And the idea that those people make a life choice, it shows she has no understanding whatsoever of humans. And I think many people were outraged by those comments. So across the piece, I'm not even sure she's fit to be a member of Parliament the way she behaves. And the fact that there's a significant number of Conservative MPs who see her as a potential leader says, well, everything you need to know about large parts of the Conservative Party.
You certainly saw from the letter that she released yesterday, and you just alluded to it then, really, that she might have been sacked as the Home Secretary, but you certainly get the feeling that that's not the last we'll hear of Suella Braverman.
Yeah, I mean, I read the same newspapers as everyone else does, and it's clear that there's a group of people who think she's the standard bearer for the right of the Conservative Party. But what I hope happens is there's an election as soon as possible, and we kick this appalling government out, and people like Suella Braverman are pushed to the far back benches, and we don't have to listen to some of her horrible views again.
As part of the reshuffle, David Cameron has come in as the Foreign Secretary. Were you as surprised as everyone else to see him turn up on the doorsteps of number 10?
I was totally surprised for multiple reasons, really. First of all, there is still a whiff of scandal around him because of his connections with Greensill and the lobbying that he did. And not only was he found of having very poor judgment in the way he behaved, I think there's still many questions unanswered. It's very odd to bring back someone with that around them. And then I thought Rishi Sunak told us he was the change politician and told us that political leaders of all parties over the last 30 years had got it wrong. Well, that was a direct attack on David Cameron, unless suddenly Rishi Sunak's changed his position yet again. So it doesn't look good for the Prime Minister, frankly. So, Yeah, I was really surprised, and I don't think it's going to go down well. I mean, I've heard Conservative commentators think that this is some sort of clever move. Well, I give it very low marks if they think this is a clever move. The truth is, people have got real problems with affording, basics at the moment. The cost of living crisis, they can't get GP appointments. There's a health service crisis. There's a crisis in our environment. Just look at what's happening in the water industry. So many things wrong, and people are going to decide their votes in the next election based on is a political party who seeks their vote got answers to those issues that are affecting them and their families and their communities. And I think Mr. Cameron's, the return of Mr. Cameron is going to make no impact on those issues that matters to people.
Absolutely. Certainly, the polling suggests that the people are aligned with that belief. And judging by social media reaction, the most common thing that we heard in response to the reshuffle is that we don't need a reshuffle. We need a general election. Would you agree with that?
Liberal Democrats have been calling for a general election for some time. Some people have said, a bit cynically, that it's because we're doing so well with all our successes at local elections and our by-election victories, and we do feel we're on the up. But actually, the real reason is that the country needs to see the back of the Conservatives. Yeah. We really, really need to see new people. Their economic policies, their social policies, their environmental policies, their political, they're just awful. I mean, it's fair to say I've fought the Conservatives all my life. I won my seat from the Conservatives. They're my main opposition, and you wouldn't be therefore surprised that I want to see them out of government. But I tell you, I think this is the worst Conservative government I have ever seen, and the lack of any vision, the multiple mistakes, the lack of integrity and honesty suggests to me that a lot of lifelong Conservatives want to see the back of them. And if there's a silver lining to all this, I hope they go down to a very bad defeat.
Mm-hmm. Of course, one of the things that might aid that is the fact that they've just been dealt a loss in the Supreme Court. Does that mean that their small votes policy is effectively in crisis now?
Well, I think it's been in crisis for a long time, to be honest. Liberal Democrats said from the outset that it was unworkable, immoral, expensive, and we've been putting forward much more sensible alternatives for some time. And I just think the latest events this week just prove the point we've been making. And the fact that they want to try to make it work, despite all the evidence, is a sad indictment of the Conservative Party. If you look at what they've been doing on immigration, it's almost as if they've been deliberately making the problem worse, so it could be an issue at the next election. I mean, I think the delays in processing asylum applications isn't just about the inefficiency of this government. I think it's a deliberate policy. And how scandalous is that? It's costing the taxpayer billions. It means that people who've had a tough time, many of whom have had a very tough time, their lives are on hold. That's inhumane. They're not able to move forward and make a contribution to our country, which undermines our country. The Conservative policy on immigration is a betrayal of the national interest. And it seems to me they're doing it for party benefit, to create more tensions. I think it's despicable.
Well, of course, the cost of the Rwanda policy in itself is in the hundreds of millions of pounds. But the thing, as you rightly say, that people probably aren't speaking about enough is the cost of their inaction on the issue too.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a whole series of things that could be done. First of all, let's make it clear, Liberal Democrats don't want to see people coming across the channel on boats, right? I think surely everyone agrees on that. The question is how best to do it. The Conservatives, people like Suella Braverman, have plenty of time, and they've failed. They've failed miserably. And therefore, I think it's time for alternative approaches. And Liberal Democrats and others, we've got ideas. I mean, let me give you a few. First of all, we do need to invest in working with other countries to tackle the international criminal gangs who are basically exploiting people and are causing some of that problem. Let's really crack down on the criminals, the people who really are making money out of human misery. Why isn't the government doing more on that? Then we should be ensuring that there are safe and legal routes for people to come here, because there will be genuine asylum seekers who it's right that they come to our country for family reasons, family reunion, for example. Surely we should be making it easier for those people. I mean, people may be surprised, but we take far fewer asylum applicants than many other countries. But people who've got family here, surely we should be making it easier for safe and legal routes for them. And when people do come here and put an asylum claim in, that asylum claim should be dealt with rapidly. So if it's not a valid claim, then they would be asked to return and be deported. And if they have a valid claim, then they can come and settle here and start working and paying taxes, right? And not costing the taxpayer billions by having to put them up in hotels or other accommodation that's deeply unsuitable and causes community tensions. I mean, Liberal Democrats have long argued for, I think we're the only nationwide party arguing for it, I could stand to be corrected on that, but that asylum seekers should have the right to work after 3 months while their asylum application is being processed. That's good for them. It's good for their mental health. It's good for their families. It's great for the taxpayer, really great for the taxpayer, and great for the economy. So, I'm trying to be reasonable and use common sense. And it's almost as if we live in this parallel universe for the Conservatives. They want to be as nasty as possible, even though it's bad for our economy and bad for the taxpayer. It just doesn't make any sense.
Do you think that the being reasonable when you're up against sort of like the nastiness and the culture wars is an argument that cuts through enough with the electorate?
Well, it's a fair point, because I've long argued that one thing we need to be careful of is allowing the right to have the emotional arguments and just leave the sort of rational reason arguments to progressives. And I think actually, if we think about carefully how we communicate our commitment to make our country a better place, a fairer place, a greener place, or caring place, then I think we can get our arguments over in a way which reaches people's hearts and speaks to their emotions. Let me give you one or two examples. I'm a strong believer that if we're going to improve the NHS, we have to improve care. And often the debate is talking about social care, which is a little bit distant from people. They're not quite sure what social care means. It means care workers in care homes and care workers in people's homes, of course, and that's really important. We need to absolutely sort out social care. But actually what it means for far more people, and I think political debates miss this, is family carers. So wives looking after husbands, husbands looking after wives, parents looking after children, children looking after their parents. The sort of caring that goes on in millions of households. And many of those households are under severe pressure, financial pressure, because sometimes they can't work or work as many hours. They've got extra expenditure. So there's a social justice issue there. There's an issue of gender equality, because often women are left holding that caring burden. There's another knock-on to health, because the mental health of people who are caring is twice as poor as the rest of the population. So we ought to be caring about carers. And I think there's an emotional argument made out there which will ring true with so many people. I speak as a carer myself, I'll be frank with you. I was a young carer because my father died when I was 4 and my mother became terminally ill when I was 12 and I had to look after her till she died with my brother till when I was 15. And obviously that was quite an emotional part, but it showed me how young carers, and I was talking to the all-party parliamentary group on young carers of the day, meeting some amazing young people. Young carers need a better deal, and they're not getting it from this government, and it would improve education chances, life chances of the young people if we looked after them a bit more. And then people who are caring for elderly relatives, people with dementia. I've had to look after my nana, because after my parents had died, my nana brought me up, my nana and granddad. And then my nana looked after me, and then when she became elderly, I looked after her. And I have a disabled son who needs 24/7 care, and with my wife and some help we care for him. So I know quite a bit about caring, And I know how it impacts on one's life. And I know from my constituency there are millions of carers out there. And I want to say, as a progressive, I want to live in a country where carers are helped and supported, because they do an amazing job, and they save the health service and the economy tens of billions of pounds. And if we want to sort out the NHS, one of the best ways to do it, and by the way, one of the most value for money ways of doing it, and one of the most socially just ways of doing it, is supporting family carers. And I think that type of real life emotional argument actually speaks to people where they are. I mean, some of this nonsense from the Conservative, actually, that's the sort of thing that progressives should be talking about.
Absolutely. We've talked about your practical approach to asylum seeking. We've talked about a practical approach to the NHS. On Rishi Sunak's 5 priorities for his administration, there was also the economy, growing the economy, reducing debt, and halving inflation. Now, you could argue that this week he successfully did one of those, although you could equally argue that had nothing to do with him. But how do you think they have performed on the economy and the debt position, and indeed, what practical approaches would you have on those issues?
Well, let's start with the Conservatives' record. I mean, it is shocking. It is utterly shocking. And, you know, the idea of the Prime Minister praising himself and his government for inflation falling, well, it's fallen across the world, in most parts of the world, faster than here, first of all. So our performance isn't anything to shout about. And when you look at food price inflation and core inflation, that's not come down quite as much. Essentially what we've seen is energy prices coming down, which is a global phenomenon. So, you know, when he announced this was his target, everyone knew he was going to meet it, because, you know, you could see the trends, anyone with any knowledge of statistics. So it was a false target, really, and it doesn't do him any credit to try to take credit for it. But broadly on the economy, our trade performance, our growth performance, the performance on reducing the debt is dreadful. It is dreadful. We're not seeing increases in productivity, which is how you actually ultimately improve growth and make people more prosperous. And people out there are hurting hard. I mean, in my constituency, I've never known people struggling so much. And not just people who are on very low incomes, but actually it's going right up the income scale now. Rents and mortgages, food prices, energy prices, maybe coming down a bit, but they're still high. And so I don't think anyone's going to look at their economic performance and say that was any good. So second part of your question is, okay, what would Liberal Democrats do about that? And let's deal with growth, because that's fundamentally how you're going to get the economy growing. There's a word that's often, because I've got a degree in postgraduate economics, that I always think is really important in economics, and that's stability. That's quite a boring word, and it's probably not going to set the pulses racing. But people need to know what the plan is. They need to know, can they rely on the government keeping to a plan? And so let's take the low-carbon economy. We all know the economy, modern economy, has got to get off fossil fuels onto renewables and clean energy. The government's performance on this is lamentable. And part of the reason why it's lamentable, because it keeps changing. It's not stable. I mean, take the example with getting rid of petrol and diesel cars. They keep changing that. Their position on things like offshore wind, they've completely messed the auction process that Liberal Democrats that set up, I legislated for. And they completely trashed that. Actually, anyone who looks at it thinks they're a joke. On insulating people's homes so people's energy bills are lower. They've messed that up totally. So stability may be a boring word, but just apply it to massive transformation in our economy, which is needed both to cut people's energy bills, to make our businesses more competitive, to deal with climate change. An utter failure, because they've not had a clear, stable plan that they've kept to. It's all about headlines. It's not about the national interest. So there's one aspect of growth. The other, obviously, is trade. Our trade performance is awful, and that might have something to do with their Brexit treaty. Liberal Democrats voted against Boris Johnson's EU deal. We thought it was a dreadful deal. I regret the Labour Party didn't. They have their own reasons, but we were really clear this was a dreadful deal for our country, that it was going to hit our businesses, hit our exporters, put up costs, not just for business, but for people in the supermarkets. And that's what's happened. We knew it was going to hit farmers, it was going to hit fishers, it was going to hit little small businesses being able to trade easily, who now no longer can afford to trade. Now, there's countless businesses I visit in my constituencies and elsewhere who say how badly it's affected them. And you know, they talk about all these trade deals they struck. I mean, it's just a joke. I mean, most of these we had deals with anyway. The changes right at the margins. I was the trade minister for a period of about 18 months, probably a bit less than that. We were in the EU. We got a deal with Korea on trade. It was a landmark deal. Everyone's written. I was quite involved with it because I represent more Koreans in my constituency than any Westminster MP. I was really pleased that we could do that for our relationship with South Korea, very, very important country. And they, first of all, they took us out of that, and then they spent ages producing a deal which is basically the same. I mean, their trade policies have been a joke. And that means lots of businesses haven't been able to make profits, haven't been able to bring in people they need for their businesses. I mean, a catalogue of errors. So whether it's on, you know, getting our economy to be greener, to go to low carbon, which we have to do, whether it's on trade, the Tories have been an utter disaster. And I believe our policies, our approach, where we want to deal with the problems in that Brexit deal, where we want to create a whole set of policies which are really clear so people will invest into our low carbon economy, they will make a big difference. It won't happen overnight because the economy is in a bit of a mess, but it would begin to make a difference. And I think people would see that. You know, for example, we've got a very ambitious programme for insulating people's homes. That would cut people's energy bills. So there'd be real things for people that would come from a Liberal Democrat approach to the economy.
Before I move on to the by-elections and other things, I have to mention the vote last night on the ceasefire, and you voted in favour of the SNP amendment. Do you see that as being the right way forward in that conflict?
Well, when I think about the Israel-Palestine conflict, I have to start with what happened on the 7th of October. I saw a film yesterday which was using the cameras of the Hamas terrorists, of traffic cameras, of some of the Jewish families, of the first responders, and it was utterly horrific. I've never seen such a horrible set of most despicable crimes. And I mention that. I know everyone rightly is understanding the bombing in Gaza is also shocking, but let's remember that.
Absolutely.
And that's why we had a different amendment to the SNP, which we tabled, because we have a different approach from the SNP. And we were a bit frustrated we couldn't vote on our amendment, because we think it deals with the nuances here.
Yeah.
Yes, we believe in an immediate bilateral ceasefire. That was right at our top of our amendment. And it was clear that it was a bilateral ceasefire. You know, both sides have to do it. And the SNP were not as clear as they needed to be on that. Secondly, we had a principle that Hamas cannot be part of the solution going forward in Gaza. They've ruled themselves out with their atrocious behaviour. And if you're going to get the Israelis to move, you need to be really clear on that. And then we were really clear, which the SNP amendment wasn't, on the need for a two-state solution and a process which will get to the long promised and never delivered two-state solution. So we had and there were many other things in our amendment which give the Liberal Democrat position. We've got a motion in the Commons, an early day motion, setting out what we think in detail along the lines I've just described. But faced with that not being called, we actually voted for both Labour's amendment and the SNP, because together they got closer. That's why both of them together they got closer to our position, but neither were really what I think the government needs to do. Labour, for some reason, weren't prepared to call for the immediate bilateral ceasefire, which seems to me as essential if you're going to get the humanitarian aid in, the food, the medicine, the water, the fuel, if you're going to get the release of the hostages, and if you're going to start this political space for the peace process that we need. And the SNP, for the reason I described, it was inadequate. However, we wanted to make it clear that Liberal Democrats believe that the killing needs to stop. We need to find a different way forward.
Of course, Suella Moran has been very vocal about this issue in Parliament and touched a lot of people's hearts. Has she been at the centre of your developing the strategy around this issue?
Yeah, Layla and I have been working very, very closely together for quite some time now. I have to say I'm really proud of her. I think the whole Liberal Democrats are very proud of Suella Moran. As people watching may know, she has a Palestinian mother. She understands the situation. Her father actually was a diplomat in the Middle East, so she really knows this situation. And she has managed, unlike others, despite even having relatives in Gaza, indeed a relative who died yesterday, she has managed to be even-handed, to understand that what happened on the 7th of October meant that Israel did have a right to defend itself, does have a right to defend itself. But we needed also to think not just of the innocent Jewish people who were killed, but the innocent Palestinians who were being killed. And I'm so proud of her that she's managed to have that even-handed approach, despite being emotionally impacted on this like no other MP. And so, yeah, she has led on this. I've worked very closely with her, and it's been a real privilege too.
Thank you for touching on that matter. Onto the by-elections. We've had a string of by-elections up till now, and this seems to be probably more on the cards. Have you been pleased with how the Lib Dems have performed so far?
Pleased doesn't come close. Let's start with Cheshire and Amersham. That was the first one. You know, we were not doing very well in the polls. We're doing a lot better now than we were back then. The Tories were over 40% of the polls, right? So Boris Johnson was in his heyday. And I looked at Cheshire and Amersham and I thought, you know what? That's a seat. I think it's interesting. There's a lot of people, really decent people, who are probably fed up with the Conservatives. And I went and knocked on some doors with some friends, and I said, this is really interesting. We had a great candidate, Sarah Green, now the MP, and I was trying to persuade the party to come in. Originally, they were a little bit sort of reluctant. What's Ed doing in Cheshire and Amersham? What these people were talking about Cheshire and Amersham? And then we got some momentum. We could really, really feel it. Everyone realised it was going to be a two-horse race between the Liberal Democrats and Conservatives. The Greens and Labour voters were coming to us in their droves, realising that we were the party, as we are in so many parts of the country, that can beat the Conservatives. And they helped us win that day. And that gave momentum going to North Shropshire, a seat the Conservatives held for 200 years, right, after the Owen Paterson scandal. We had a brilliant candidate, Helen Morgan, now the MP. But I have to say, like Cheshire and Amersham, no one thought we could win North Shropshire. But we started knocking on doors, listening to people. That's a critical thing I wanted to do when I became leader, is make sure we were listening to people really hard, understanding their concerns. And in North Shropshire, it was about the ambulance services. I mean, I kid you not, I've knocked on some doors in a lovely little town called Wem, and ambulance waiting times were coming up on almost every other door. So we started asking questions. We could see that the West Midland Ambulance Service was not performing very well, that they closed a lot of community ambulance stations. And so we started a campaign on that. And then we uncovered other issues. Then we speaking to the farmers who feel betrayed by the Conservatives. And we won that seat. And again, amazing victory for us. We were third at the previous election, but we overtook Labour and won. Then we had Tiverton Honiton. I won't go with this whole long story, but we came from third and won Tiverton Honiton in East Devon. Great candidate Richard Ford, former Major in the British Army, fantastic because it's the MP now. And then, of course, a by-election where you might have expected to win in Somerton Froome because we'd held that seat before, unlike the other three I've mentioned. But we turned I think it was 11,000 Tory majority, maybe a 19,000 Tory majority into 19,000 Tory majority into 11,000 Liberal Democrat majority to get Sarah Dyke elected. I mean, amazing. And for me, that Devon result and Somerset result gave me a sense we're back in the West Country. You know, the Liberal Democrats have always been strong in the West Country. We've retreated a little bit in recent years. Looks like we're now the party to vote for if you want to get the Conservatives out in those sorts of seats.
Given the sort of things that's happening at the national level and how a lot of these by-elections come about because of scandal, you do actually forget, to your point, about the importance of those local issues. But that's really important, isn't it?
Oh, critical. I mean, I think I listen to a lot of political commentators who are all in the Westminster bubble. Yeah. I think it's all about that. Yeah. It just isn't. Go and talk to people. And when you talk to them, guess what? They're worried about paying their bills. Mm. They're worried about, can they get an NHS dentist? Can they get for the kids? Can they get a GP appointment? What are their hospital waiting times like? They're worried about their local environment, parks, green spaces, the quality of water in the sea or in the river. These are the issues that people talk about. Housing for the kids. And what Liberal Democrats are doing now, I believe, we've really got back to our community politics roots, where we keep selecting for councillors and for parliamentary candidates people who are local champions, who know their area, from their area, get it, care about it passionately, and care about, you know, the local NHS that serves the local communities. Make sure there's enough police on them, community police, to keep neighbourhoods and towns and villages safe, care about the local schools, care about the local environment. And I think that you'll see that more as we get to the election. You know, I'm so proud of some of the great candidates we've got in the seats. I really think we can beat the Conservatives in there. They're campaigning away, they're listening to local people, and they're campaigning on these sorts of issues.
Of course, you had some high-profile people at your conference talking about the importance on a national scale of tactical voting at the next election. Now, that's obviously a really good way of making sure that the Conservatives don't get near power, but equally, it could be interpreted as maybe the first step towards a different way of voting.
Well, guess what? Liberal Democrats want electoral reform. That is a staggering news item, breaking news for you. And, you know, we've long campaigned for it, and we've campaigned it because it's the right thing. Yeah. If you want to improve democracy, if you want to improve outcomes for people, be it in the health service, be it in schools, be it on the environment, climate change, you need to have a way of bringing parties together, forcing them to work together, forcing them to find what they have in common, forcing them to take a more long-term approach, not a short-term approach. And if you look around, particularly around Europe, there are a lot of countries that do have proportional representation, or one of the forms of proportional representation. And it's led to good government. Now, be clear, not every form of PR do I support. We particularly like the system of elections in the Republic of Ireland. Single transferable vote. It leads to stable government, to more representative government, and to better government. And that's what we want. Something that improves our democracy, where people's votes really count, that therefore leads to better government. Sure. It's actually quite a radical change of our political system. And it's why I think it distinguishes Liberal Democrats. If you want a sort of vision of how we're really going to improve our country, changing the way we do elections is actually quite a fundamental change. And, you know, I say to other parties, you know, you need to recognise that we need this change to improve the trust that people have in democracy, to make sure our democracy can perform better.
Absolutely. And finally, I would consider myself, along with many others, on the progressive side of politics. I want action on the climate. I probably want a closer relationship with Europe. I'm sick to the back teeth of culture wars. Is the Liberal Democrats the party for me?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, our policies on climate change, our record on climate change is better than any other party. And we are absolutely determined to deal with the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, the crisis in nature and local environments. When it comes to Europe, we are very pro-European. We want Britain to be back at the heart of Europe. We've got to start in a very measured way to improve those relationships, those trade relationships, those relationships tackling international crime and so on. But building that trust again is critical, and we do need to work more closely with our neighbours. I mean, it's just common sense, I think. And I just think the culture wars are just there to divide us. And I think politicians who actively seek to divide us are shameful. Real stateswomen bring people together, and they find the language and the issues that can unite us. And when there are difficult issues, they don't take the easy path of populism, but they actually try to grapple in a mature way with those difficult issues, being honest with people. And I'm afraid we've got the most dishonest government in my lifetime.
Sir Ed Davey, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.